21 years ago, Volvo launched its first crossover utility vehicle, the V70 XC, which featured standard all-wheel drive, an increased ride height, unpainted side trim and sills, a unique front grille, and thicker floor mats with special canvas leather upholstery. Our spotlight is on this 2019 Volvo V60 XC, or Cross Country. Now, the 37mm ground clearance over the 1998 model isn't the only thing to change. So we're going to go over everything you need to know if you're in the market for a crossover wagon utility vehicle. This week I have the unique opportunity to have two of Volvo's vehicles from the press fleet here in our garage. Without going into the logistics of it, we're not doing a showdown on these two, but it does give me a good opportunity to show you what's different with the Cross Country while looking directly at the S60. Now keep in mind, a couple months ago we did do the V60 Inscription. That's the fully loaded V60 model. This S60, our design is the mid-range, more sport-oriented model, but they are quite different. And if we had the V60 Inscription, I'd be able to really show you the differences, but because they basically are the same car, it still is a good opportunity for us to see what's different. Now, this 2019 V60 T6 Cross Country is well equipped at $60,625 Canadian. Now, that's around the same price as the 2019 BMW 330i xDrive that we featured. The biggest mechanical difference between the 3 Series or even the C-Class and the Volvo S60 V60 is this is a front-wheel drive vehicle with all-wheel drive, whereas the BMW Mercedes, those are rear-wheel drive with all-wheel drive. So that's the biggest difference between that. Here in Canada, you can only get the T5 engine with the Cross Country. It produces 250 horsepower, 258 pound-feet of torque, whereas this T6, our design, has a 316 horsepower engine. So what's different between this and, again, something like the S60 or the V60? Well, the ground clearance is higher, 61 millimeters better at 203 millimeters. And to put that into perspective, one of our favorite crossovers in the consumer segment, the Mazda CX-5, has a ground clearance of 190 millimeters. This actually would theoretically do better off-road than one of the most popular vehicles sold here in Canada in the compact crossover segment. You also have the unpainted side cladding and trim all the way around. It adds a little bit to the overall length and width of the vehicle. There's 23 millimeters more length on this over the V60. It's 43 millimeters wider on the body. Doesn't include the mirrors. The mirror width is the same, but 43 millimeters just because of the cladding on the side. 67 millimeters taller, 2 millimeters longer for the wheelbase, and the overall front and rear track is wider on this vehicle. Plus, the cargo floor in the back is a little bit better. That's ground to top. So there's a lot to go with this over the regular V60 Inscription, and again, a lot to go over compared to this S60 because this is a sedan, and believe it or not, the Cross Country is considered a crossover. And as far as I'm concerned, this is the most literal representation of a crossover. It's a car that just happens to have more of an off-road utility vehicle characteristic behind it. So I like this because it is more of a crossover. And I think that this is a better vehicle as a crossover, something you want as a family hauler than an actual crossover utility vehicle. A lot of the ones that we've featured so far, this will probably be the best. And we're going to go over why I think that. Now, I do recommend looking at our V60 Inscription episode that we did a little while ago. Essentially, the tech and features are the same. You can have things like a graphic head-up display and slight little changes on the inside. It's not optioned on this specific vehicle, but for the most part, everything is about the same. Things like a telesafe, the LED adaptive headlights on the front, all that pretty much the same from the V60 Inscription that we did. One of the things that I didn't talk about too much, just because now we've done all 3 in the 60 series family, is where they're built. This Cross Country is built in Sweden. However, this red S60 is built in Volvo's new South Carolina, USA plant. So this is an American-built car. This one is a Swedish-built car. One of the other mechanical changes that we didn't really go into too much detail with on the V60 Inscription is the rear suspension. Now, a lot of consumer cars in the compact segment have switched over to a coupled torsion beam. Because this is a compact executive car, it fits more in line with a mid-sized consumer. But with this, they've changed from a multi-link rear independent suspension to a transverse leaf spring. Now, it'd be really hard to tell with this vehicle unless you absolutely knew that the technical changes were there and you were really a connoisseur of a multi-link rear independent suspension. It is something important to note. Volvo is doing this across this lineup of vehicles. So whether you go with the Inscription, the R Design, the Momentum, or the Cross Country for either the S60 or V60, it will have that leaf spring setup in the back. I couldn't tell the difference. Honestly, we've loaded up both cars with things. We've taken them on longer drives. I've done a lot of driving with all three of these vehicles now, including the Inscription, and I honestly couldn't tell the difference. So something to note there, it's interesting that they're going with a different setup than pretty much anybody else on the market. But it's around back that I'm quite excited to have both of these vehicles for, because I didn't really realize it, especially when we did the S90 before. I was talking about the rear end design of Volvo sedans, and I said I wasn't really a big fan of it. But now that I've spent quite a bit of time with the S60 and I'm spending time with the V60 Cross Country, I realized something. If you take a look at the backs here, the taillights for the V series, they go up around the rear glass. Looks really nice, kind of similar to what Volvo has been doing with their design language for quite some time. But if you actually look at the S60, the taillights are the same, they're just positioned differently. I thought that was really cool. It's a small detail, so if you really were to move this portion that runs horizontally along the back of the S60 upward, it's basically the same thing. It's a cool little thing to note there. Again, if you were to look at it in photos, I'm sure you would have been able to tell, but because this is the first chance that I've had to have both vehicles parked beside each other in an episode like this, I think it's really neat to be able to see it. A couple little features back here. You do have a power lift kit on the back of the Cross Country. Nice feature to have. You can load it up with things. We've seen this on their crossover vehicles. You do have a privacy shield that is built in so that you can get into it really well. But here's the thing, a lot of people want crossovers, right? They want something bigger, they want to be able to put more stuff in it, even though they're probably not going to be using it for more stuff most of the time. People just like to have big when they don't really need it. Again, this has a better ground clearance than one of the most popular vehicles in the consumer segment, the Mazda CX-5. At 203 millimeters, you shouldn't get stuck anywhere. There is a dedicated off-road mode in the computer cluster, so you can change to a low-speed off-road mode, be able to get out of muddy or snowy situations. If you were to compare it with something like a BMW X3 or even Volvo's XC60, this is going to just look a little bit better. I like the look of this. I like the way that it handles, it drives. It's got the storage capacity that I need, interior space that really works out well, and the ground clearance is certainly good considering this is so low to the ground when you consider how other crossovers are set up. Now, we're not going to jump on the inside and talk about the features there just because it's pretty much the same that we've talked about. We will go over it slightly on our road test, but I want to take this vehicle on the road now and talk about how it compares, especially to the V60 Inscription that we did, but then also a little bit how it compares to the more powerful T6 engine in the S60. So we're going to go over everything else you need to know about the 2019 Volvo V60 T5 Cross Country. So I want to go over some of the interior stuff really quickly, and then we'll talk about the rest of the drive of this vehicle. This does have leather seating on here instead of the cloth kind of seats you can get on the Cross Country. These are very similar, if not the same, as the Momentum seats we saw in the XC90 a little while ago. And I have to say that they're really comfortable. Volvo continues to make some of the best seats on the market. Even though these aren't as nice as the Inscription or R Design ones, I'm still super comfortable here. Really, really nice seating. So when it comes to tech, we do see pretty much everything that we have on the other vehicles, especially something like the S60 or the V60 Inscription. The seats don't have ventilation, but you do have heated front, heated outboard seats, heated steering wheel. You can get a color HUD if you wanted to. It's not optioned on this specific car, but overall you have all the same stuff that we've come to expect. 360-degree camera. Again, image quality is excellent. It's just the way that it lines up isn't the best. I still have issues with senses. All the vehicles I've driven so far have the same senses issues, where on startup it is incredibly slow. Hopefully one day it'll get fixed if they do switch to an Android operating system. I think that'd be really nice. But you really do have everything that you'd absolutely want to have on a crossover. You just sit a little bit lower, and even though you sit lower, I mean, I still feel like I'm sitting high enough that things are really good here. Visibility is good. Ground clearance, like we mentioned, at 203 millimeters is really good for this size of a vehicle. And I have to say that overall, you really do get the best of both worlds. If you really must have a higher ride height, but still have enough room for a family of 3 or 4, because I'm very comfortable in here, I can fit my entire family in here and a bunch of stuff in the back, then you really are in business. And if, again, you think about what else you can get for about $60,000 Canadian, you're looking at the compact crossovers from the luxury market. Audi Q5, BMW X3, Mercedes GLC 300. Those are all vehicles you can get for around the same price. And I gotta say, I'd rather take this every time. It's a wagon. I mean, it looks so good, but you get all the other functionality from the crossover, like having sort of the rugged look to it, the off-road mode, which you go over 40, it won't work anymore. You can really feel that throttle control is different. I like to keep it in dynamic. And then even though it only has 250 horsepower, it still gets the job done. I'm not too upset that they don't offer the T6 here for this type of vehicle. You don't really need it. And overall, if you are going to be driving and maybe towing something, I wouldn't necessarily tow a huge trailer, but if you had something like a small camper van or a little trailer, you're going camping, things like that, you're not going to have too much trouble with the turbocharged only inline-4 engine. Yeah, it's got a decent sound to it. We talked about it before with Volvo's vehicles. Like, there isn't like an excitement coming out of the back. If you do have a T6 model with the supercharger and the turbocharger, it has a really nice sound to it. And you can watch more about what we're doing with the S60R design because that one's got it. But I gotta say, for daily use, there's more than enough pickup. Small amount of turbo lag off the line, but if you're already moving and you put the accelerator down, you're in business. Now, I mentioned two of the important things to note about the mechanics of this vehicle. Like I said, the transverse mounted leaf spring in the back. We're going over some rougher stuff here. I don't feel it in the front. I don't have any complaints when I'm in the back of the vehicle if I'm being driven around, and my daughter is fine back there too. I don't really have a way to test it any further than that, but it is a unique system. I don't think it really takes away that much from the overall experience, but some people are pretty into their independent rear suspension. So again, keep that in mind. And then again, the other thing too, since this is a front wheel drive chassis, it's not really the most sporty experience, but again, you know, it picks up pretty quick. It handles pretty well. I've thrown the S60 around a little bit more than this, and it is a lot of fun to put it in. You just have to keep in mind that it is front wheel drive, and that's why if we were to compare especially this vehicle, this exact cross country, to something else in the market, the most direct competitor would be the Audi A4 all-road, because it is a front-wheel drive based vehicle with all-wheel drive, with some unpainted cladding and a higher ride height than the traditional A4 wagon. So both of those cars are pretty similar. BMW does not make a off-roady kind of 3 Series, neither does Mercedes with the C-Class. So those are really the two most comparable. We also did do the Volkswagen Golf All-Track. Again, since we don't really do a lot of off-road stuff here, I can't do a ton of testing with it. But again, most people probably aren't going to be doing that. I mean, especially if you're buying a Volvo, you want it to be safe, you want it to be comfortable, you want it to have a lot of the tech features and goodies and gadgets that you'd want out of a vehicle. But are a lot of people really going to be taking this like true off-road? I'd say no. I'd say that the people who are looking at the cross country over a regular V60 Momentum might be looking at this because you have a cottage. Maybe it's got a dirt road to get there, and you want something that will hold up just a little bit better than your typical wagon, just because the unpainted portions of it theoretically should be a little bit more rugged. You know, if you hit some stones and things like that, it won't damage the paint or the metalwork. That will probably be the top demographic for people looking at the cross country. Or again, somebody who just wants a more crossover oriented vehicle. You still like the handling and drive of a car, or in this case a station wagon, and you want something different, because there really aren't that many of them out there. I haven't seen any of the cross countries on the road over the last 2 or 3 months. I've seen a lot of new 2019 60 Series Volvos, including the S60 and V60, but this is the only cross country that I've seen, and that's because they're still relatively new for dealers here in Canada. We'll go from a rolling start here. We're at 20 kilometers. If I put it down, it takes a second for it to figure out which gear it's supposed to be in. But again, it picks up pretty well. I mean, most people aren't going to be launching this car, right? But you might be in a situation where you want to know how quickly you can get up to speed. You know, maybe you're driving and somebody comes up behind you too quick and you need to get out of the way. Definitely has the power for it. It just takes a second or so. You can put the car into manual shift mode if you want to. It has the wrong shift pattern. You have to pull towards you to shift down, push away from you to shift up. There are no paddle shifters on this, so you're pretty much stuck with that. But again, most people, and I keep saying that because there aren't a lot of people who are going to be looking at this vehicle. It really is going to be a pretty narrow set of criteria. So the most people who are going to be looking at this vehicle aren't going to keep it in manual mode. Hell, they're not even going to keep it in dynamic mode. You're probably going to keep it in eco mode or keep it in comfort mode if you really want to. And that's how the car will start up by default. But just because we're doing a little bit of fun testing here, we're going to keep it in dynamic mode. Normally with an episode of Test Drive Snapshot, I don't go over my likes and dislikes, and that's going to be true for this video just because we have talked about it and they are the same from the V60 Inscription that we featured a couple months ago. But here's why I'm talking to you live, in the video at least, instead of doing a script and going over things at the end. I made a pretty bold statement in the title of this video. I really said that this is the best crossover that we've tested, and I want to tell you why. Now, before we get into that, I just want to talk fuel economy real quick. We did 7.8 liters per 100 kilometers or 30 US miles per gallon on our 100 kilometer test loop. That was only 0.1 liters per 100 kilometers worse than the V60 Inscription. And that really could just be a plus or minus error due to wind speed, amount of traffic on the road, things like that. So they are pretty much the same. There's no hit for taking the crossover. Now, we can't really compare this directly with the XC60 T6 Inscription that we did because that was a plug-in hybrid vehicle. Pricing was significantly more than this. But if we took a 2019 XC60 T5 Momentum, and keep in mind that the Cross Country is sort of like a Momentum Plus, fits in between, you're spending $2,675 more if you go for the Cross Country. So the MSRP for the Momentum version of an XC60 loaded up essentially the same would be $57,950 Canadian. Aside from, I think, fog lights, which you don't get on that on the front, but you do get a booster seat in the rear, that's it. The cars are pretty much the same in terms of the kit, the features, and the options. But there are some differences on paper that I want to go over between something like the XC60 and this. The XC60 has 13 millimeters more ground clearance, but that number shrinks to just a few millimeters if you go with the self-leveling suspension. The towing capacity of the XC60 is more, 1,500 pounds more of it over this, and you can also put more on the roof than you can on this. The interior dimensions too are also important to note. Aside from just the front legroom, everything is a little bit bigger when it comes to the interior of the XC60 for passengers. Whether it's shoulder room, legroom, or headroom, it's just slightly better on the XC60, plus you sit a little bit higher up than you do on this. You have a more upright position. But it's interesting, when it comes to cargo capacity and luggage capacity, it's better on the V60 Cross Country. You can put more in this vehicle than you can with the XC60. So if you're buying your car because you want something that's a little off-roady, you need a little bit more space than your traditional car, then this might be a good option for you. And that's why I really do say that this is one of, if not the best crossover that we have driven here on Test Drive. You really get the best of both worlds. It is one of the sexiest cars you can buy as well. Volvo's design language right now is killer. The functionality of having a wagon is also great. Plus, the car just still handles exactly like you would expect a car to handle, despite the fact that it rides just a little bit higher. Everything else about it is pretty much the same. Now, that's the thing. If I had to take a crossover, this would be it hands down. But even compared to a car is where things get interesting, because I have had the 2019 Volvo V60 T6 R design in the garage at the same time as this. It really shows which car I've been able to pick the most this week. And I have to tell you, believe it or not, I'm taking the Cross Country more times than I have with the R design. I just like the way this car looks. I like the way it handles. I like the way it drives. It's not as quick, quite a bit less powerful than the T6 engine on the R design, but I've been picking this car over it every single time I want to go for a drive. And that I never thought I'd say. I never would stand here and say that I would drive a crossover more than a sedan, but I'm doing it. So if you haven't considered something like the Cross Country, I suggest taking a look at this car. Yes, it is pricey at the $60,000 price point. If you're comparing it to a consumer level car, obviously it's going to look a lot more expensive. But take a look, compare it to something like BMW X3, Mercedes GLC, or Audi Q5, and you'll see that on paper, they're very close. But once you get behind the wheel, then you'll understand why I say that this is the truest example of what a crossover should be. You get the handling and ride of a car with the off-road capabilities and storage capacity of a crossover. And the best part of all of that is, unlike most crossovers that just don't look that good, you'll be driving around in something that looks fantastic.